As a faithful remake of the original Advance Wars, Reboot Camp doesn't skimp on the difficulty. For veterans of the series, that's totally expected. These have never been easy games, but for newcomers who've only heard of Intelligence Systems' Wayward Child, it might come as a shock. If that sounds like you, or you're just rusty and need some reminders, I'm here to provide some helpful tips that'll smooth out your gameplay experience. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you enjoy my content and would be willing to help me out, subscribing and liking the video before you go would do me wonders. I'm a small creator, and YouTube is my full-time career, so helping me out would be a godsend. Thank you in advance. Point number 1, always be building. Money saved is money often wasted. If you're not saving for something very, very specific, it's better to have more units on the field than better units on the field the majority of the time. Regular tanks may not typically be able to hold their own against their bigger siblings, for example, they might not be as flashy either, but they can still devastate artillery, rockets, recons, anti-air, infantry. Sometimes they'll even give you that little bump in damage you need to finish off a bigger target, and that's damage you may very well not have available to you if you've spent all your time saving for bigger, costlier units. And if you only have, say, 8,000 income per turn at the current point in the battle, you can cover more ground and exert more influence in said battle with a tank and an infantry unit every turn instead of a single medium tank every other turn. Having more units also allows you to better control troop movements on the battlefield, which is a vital layer to Advance Wars strategy. A tank or an anti-air paired with an artillery unit has far more versatility to block choke points and endanger the enemy in rough terrain than a single medium tank typically will for the same cost. And having 3 to 4 recons to speed around the map and deny enemy advances on valuable properties can work magic that a similarly priced rocket just can't. This is not to say that there's no time and place for these more valuable and powerful units, of course, they're in the game for a reason, but there is something to be said for having so many little lads strewn across the battlefield that your opponent literally can't move where they want to. So, keep that pressure up, keep those units built, and keep your front line loaded. Point number 2, infantry are some of the most important units in the game. Hand in hand with our previous point, it is vitally important to always have infantry, and by extension mechs, reinforcing your lines. The humble infantry may not seem like much, it might have the most damage output in the world, but realistically, these truly are some of the best units in the game. Given their cheap cost and the importance of capturing properties, it's in your best interest to always be building infantry alongside more specialized units. Not only will they allow you to fend off enemy infantry, but they can deal decent damage to enemy artillery and are good at body blocking the enemy force to buy you time in sticky situations where you need the chance to maneuver. Unique terrain like mountains can only be traversed on the ground by infantry and grant a big 4 terrain stars for defense as well as a lot of vision in Fog of War, making these units surprisingly resilient against many enemies. And you can make use of some unique avenues of approach thanks to this ability as well. Similarly, infantry can ford rivers to get around blockades on bridges and start softening up artillery and rockets behind the enemy line. Finally, the HQ cap is a massively important win condition, and if you don't have enough infantry to even entertain the idea of winning this way, you're unnecessarily limiting yourself and denying yourself the possibility of an easy win. Point number 3, don't avoid building your CO's quote-unquote bad units. It's easy to see statements like Max has bad ranged units or Grit and Sami don't have good tanks and fall into the mindset that that means you should just never build those units with those COs. After all, why waste your money on something that's not good when you could build something that they're better with, right? Wrong. Grit still needs tanks, even if he's not great with them. After all, something needs to hold the line while his artillery do their jobs, right? It shouldn't be the focus of your strategy, sure, but these quote-unquote bad units will have a role to play. Similarly, Max's rockets have less range and damage, but they do still have some range, and they still do hurt, they're still rockets. And more likely than not, his tanks are going to be face-to-face with the enemy for the majority of their life. And if the enemy's going to be that close to your front, you'll still be able to hit them with a rocket or a battleship. That said, Max's artillery in particular is really bad, so there might be less justification to build those, but still, the point stands. At the end of the day, every unit has its place in Advance Wars, and some numbers being tweaked down on their stats by like 10 or 20% doesn't change the role that they fill. Number 4, luck is on your side. If you've ever stopped to wonder why it is that you were able to take an enemy tank battalion from 100 to 0 with one shot, even though that attack said you'd only be dealing around 90% damage, you might feel like you got lucky. That'd be good intuition, because you'd be right. You see, there's a hidden luck mechanic in Advance Wars that can fluctuate damage up and down by about 10%, with some exceptions, which we'll talk about shortly. This means it's sometimes worth it to gamble on a low damage hit. If the enemy's HP is within 10% of the stated damage, you may just get the kill. However, it's important to keep in mind that this can also be the case for the enemy, so try to keep luck in mind when building your strategy and shifting your army around. You can't always account for it unless you, like me, are some sort of learning computer disguised as a meat puppet, but it's still something to consider. Think of it kind of like critical hits in Fire Emblem. It's not to be relied on most of the time, but it is a factor. Now, that said, there are certain COs like Nell, Sonya, and in Advance Wars 2, Flak, that have a more volatile, shall we say, relationship with the luck mechanic. Nell's entire playstyle and power set is built around getting free damage through luck, and she has her own unique luck stat to complement that. Sonya, on the other hand, is simply unlucky across the board and can lose damage randomly no matter how good her strategy is. Whereas Flak fluctuates wildly between insane highs and insane lows in terms of his luck, and as such, how much damage he deals. Sometimes he'll have the highest damage output in the game, sometimes his Neo-tanks won't be able to take out infantry. It's just kind of putting your fate in God's hands, as they say. Point number 5, don't be afraid to use your CO meter. The power boost provided by your CO meter and your powers is very important. And even if it only gives you a small advantage, that's better than waiting for the perfect time to use it when that time may very well never come. If you hold it too long, you'll potentially miss out on additional uses down the line, so if you don't have a specific goal in mind that requires you to save your power, use it as soon as the opportunity presents itself. It's important to remember, your power will always give you an offense and a defense boost across the board, or at least it will in most circumstances, and that alone can turn the tide in your favor even if the actual main effect of your power is useless or lacks impact in the current engagement. In Advance Wars 2, this goes doubly for your regular CO power versus using your superpower. While your superpower is, perhaps not surprisingly, very, very strong, you can often get just as much advantage out of multiple uses of your smaller power. Some people might even argue that your superpower is a bit of a win more situation. If you're in a situation where you can safely use it, you were probably winning anyway and don't strictly need it. But I mean, there are times where it's useful. Either way, don't hold out too long, and if you need a little push to take out that rocket, medium tank combo that's causing you problems, pop your power. Go for it. Clear the way. Point number 6, keep an eye on the enemy CO meter. Speaking of meters, it's important that you keep an eye on how charged your opponent's meter is. You see, CO powers are charged much more quickly by taking damage than receiving it, so a big push on your enemy could result in a nasty crackback if you charge their power for them before you're ready to handle it. Ideally, you want to destroy just enough units to avoid charging the meter for an extra turn where you can, allowing you to get just a little bit of extra opportunities for damage in before your opponent gets the chance to really slap back. Conversely, you could also use that time to fall back if you're worried about the damage that you receive during the enemy's power turn. If the enemy already has their power charged, consider holding out on using your own power until they use theirs as well. The reason for this is that damage you deal and receive when your power is active is essentially wasted in terms of the power charge mechanic. You can't gain charge while your power is active. Knowing this, you can turn this mechanic to your advantage by popping your own power and pushing hard and fast once the enemy uses theirs. So long as their power is active, you're not going to be giving them any bonus power for utilizing your own. Just beware, as once their power is spent, your push could very well wind up charging it again. So, navigating around CO powers and manipulating the rate at which they charge might be a little bit more of an advanced tactic compared to boots on the ground troop movements and strategy, but being aware of how the system works and how you can use it to your advantage can help you achieve victory against tough enemies like Sturm, or maybe even up your game in versus battles. So keep one eye on that meter, y'all. And point number 7, use APCs as bait. In Advance Wars 1. Not as useful in Advance Wars 2. Still useful, but not as useful. So why do I say to use your APCs and by extension your transport copters and landers as bait? Well, In Advanced Wars 1, the enemy AI hates transport units like APCs and transport copters. I'm talking a deep-seated, therapy-needed loathing for these units. The AI will almost always target these units when given the chance in Advanced Wars 1, even if there are more powerful or valuable units like rockets or medium tanks or even bombers or fighters in their range that they could attack. And you can use this to your advantage by leaving your transport units vulnerable to draw fire away from said more powerful units. Consider, an APC is only 5,000 funds, and while yes, that's funds that could go towards building other combat units or even repairing other combat units, you might not need to do that if you can get 3 or even 4 enemy units to target said APC, giving you time to maneuver, destroy the enemy, get first strikes in, and overall save yourself a lot of damage. When it comes to things like transport copters and landers, this becomes a little less viable as those are more expensive units. You're going to want to protect them a little bit more thoroughly because they will cost you much more to replace. But even so, in a pinch, if you're really trying to make sure that you can protect a valuable combat unit that's in danger of being destroyed, consider throwing a transport unit in its way, and 9 times out of 10, the AI is going to go for it. This, of course, doubly helps you when you're building APCs because you'll have extra opportunities to move your copious infantry around, as long as you've taken my other point about building infantry to heart, and you'll be able to easily resupply your other units because you have so many APCs on the field. You don't want your entire army to be APCs, of course, but this is definitely a point to consider, especially if you're struggling getting through some particularly difficult maps. You don't want to rely on it too much. If you're trying to go for S rank, then you don't want to have too many units get destroyed. You want to be able to efficiently clear maps with high speed ratings, so it's not going to be a catch-all, win-all strategy, but it is definitely good to know, and honestly, I'm kind of glad that they carried this AI quirk over from the original games. It's part of the spirit of it, you know? And those are my 7 beginner and or rusty returning player tips for Advanced Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp. There's a ton of stuff that I could cover in this game. If you feel that there are any points that I should have included in a list like this, by all means, drop them in the comments below. If there's enough stuff that people would like to see me cover in a general tips video for maybe another part, then I'll do just that. If there are other topics that you would like me to cover as well in Advanced Wars, more advanced strategies, how to use particular COs effectively, if there's maps that you're struggling with, let me know that as well. And if there's enough demand for them, then I can put those videos together as soon as possible too. That said, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so much for watching and for all of your support. Helping this small creator grow over the last few months has been wonderful. I seriously cannot thank you guys enough, so thank you for the continued support. If you want to support, I've got a Patreon, memberships, you can subscribe, all that type of stuff, and there'll be plenty more videos to come. So until then, I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.